subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
As is customary on the eve of the union budget, the government's economic survey is out. Now, if you look at this economic survey, in tone, in emphasis, in direction, this is quite different from any that Modi governments have put out so far, that is beginning 2014. So this is a big shift. And to tell you what, I like this shift and I like this economic survey, and I'm hoping that this shows a change in the direction of India's political economy. So you can read the survey, it's in 2 volumes, it's a large one, and if you're an economist or even if you have basic academic knowledge of economics, which I don't, you can read those charts and you can understand those figures better. So I'm not going into those figures and things. I'm talking about the political messages I read here and the political lessons we can learn from it, because it's a democracy. In a democracy, behind everything from economics to warfare, behind everything there is politics. So what is the politics that this economic survey is indicating? As I go into that, let me pick out some catchphrases from this. So first, the 3 that catch my attention. One is wealth. So far in India, we talk about poverty. We glorify poverty, we privilege poverty over wealth. Wealth is bad, poverty is good. So anybody to be virtuous has to be poor, and anybody who's wealthy is by definition a suspect or a usual suspect. So from my childhood days, it was like, वो तो बिरला टाटा का आदमी है, वो तो बिरला टाटा है, वो सेठों का आदमी है. Now it's like Ambani Adani का आदमी है. So if you made money, if you've created wealth, you are seen to be a suspect. There is a challenge to that now, because this economic survey puts wealth above everything. And to make that point, it actually uses a lot from Indian culture and India's own rich and very glorious past. It reminds us, first of all, that for 3/4 of the known human history, India has been the dominant global economic power. Then it says that it was the dominant global economic power when India's economy was free, when what Adam Smith calls the invisible hand of the market was allowed to work and government didn't interfere too much. And there are quotes liberally used both from Thirukural, that is from Thiruvalluvar, the southern saint, and also from Kautilya, and I will read the translations. In fact, it's these shlokas that begin the survey. It says, "Wealth, the lamp unfailing, speeds to every land, dispersing darkness at its Lord's command." Thirukural, and the second one from Thirukural, both from chapter 76, "Make money, there is no weapon sharper than it to sever the pride of your foes." So once again, it tells you that there is nothing non-Indian about capitalism. There is nothing non-Indian about making money. There is nothing non-Indian about free markets. That free market is not an idea that suddenly got transplanted into India from the evil West. In fact, it's a native Indian idea, and as long as India followed it, India prospered. It was a dominant economic power, and then in the last 7 decades, India had what is called as tryst with destiny. So that is the second important catchphrase I pick up, tryst with destiny. And the third is trust. I will come to that. Trust as in Trust. Now, I told you about Thiruvalluvar. There is also a quote then from Kautilya, not to leave anything to chance. It says, "The root of wealth is economic activity, and lack of it, that is lack of wealth, brings material distress. In the absence of fruitful economic activity, both current prosperity and future growth are in danger of destruction." I think that's what some of us have been writing in our editorials now for decades. But the answer always was, what about the poor? And we said, let wealth be created, it will reach the poor. No, trickle down doesn't happen. But this is Kautilya talking. "A king can achieve the desired objectives and abundance of riches by undertaking productive economic activity." The survey is quoting Kautilya, and then goes on to say, quoting Kautilya again, that he advocates economic freedom by asking the king to remove all obstructions to economic activity. Now, this is exactly the opposite of the kind of political economy we've had for most of our history since 1947, except for one phase, 1991. And that is the other important takeaway from this survey. There's a lot of mention of 1991. In fact, it's almost as if India's economic history, independent India's economic history can be divided into two epochs. One is pre-91, second is post-1991. So the fifth point that I pick out of this is Dr. Manmohan Singh, who is not mentioned in this one. Because this economic survey is like a mega compliment to Dr. Manmohan Singh and Manmohanomics. Because it goes on to say that real growth in India was really going downwards, it was really struggling, but real prosperity and growth came as a result of the 1991 reform, when the invisible hand of the markets was strengthened, which means market forces were allowed to function, and when the government intervention or role of the state came down. And then it also goes on to show with data that those sectors which the government liberalized post 1991, those have done much better than those that were not liberalized. You ask me to simplify this, I can tell you, look at telecom. It got liberalized, how well it is doing. Look at railways, did not get liberalized. How not very well it is doing. So that is where you see the difference, that allow Indian entrepreneurship to function freely. Of course, intervene when something is going wrong. Don't let the government interfere in too much. And what that means is trust people. So that is again the key thing in this economic survey. Wealth, trust, tryst with socialism. The three big takeaways, which means the government should trust the citizen, the government should trust the businessman, the entrepreneur. The government should not commit the citizen essentially with an idea of suspicion, because once you start with suspicion, then comes the license quota Raj, and then comes the inspector Raj, and then you see the worst kind of impact of government intervention. In fact, the survey goes on to remind us that many areas where government might have intervened, and it says that government should intervene when there is market failure, but not when markets are functioning well. So things like Essential Commodities Act, when India was going through a period of famines and food shortage, it has no relevance now. And the survey lists tens of thousands of raids are carried out under this act. It's just something that is misused, achieves nothing. It should go. It was designed for times when market mechanisms had failed in food, so government had to do something. Now market mechanisms are doing well. India has surplus food. It is not needed. Similarly, Food Corporation of India, which procures all this food today, is not needed. You should trust the markets and trust the people in the markets to, one, give the farmers the best value, and second, also create market forces whereby what is needed, more of what is needed is produced, and not necessarily more of what government will just buy, put it in some godowns where half of it will rot. So once again, a big vote for unleashing market forces everywhere. In fact, read some lines from the survey. It says the exponential rise in India's GDP and GDP per capita post-liberalization coincides with wealth generation in the stock market. And that to me is a very interesting observation. In fact, if you look at this chart, and you will see it with greater clarity on our screen, this is from the economic survey, it shows that the first journey from 100 points to 5,000 points for Sensex took 13 years. The next journey of 5,000 points took only 6.5 years. That is half the period. The next 5,000 points, only 1.5 years. The 5,000 points after that, 6 months. 6 months. So what took 13 years earlier took 6 months now. Next 5,000, there was a bit of a slowdown, etc. Took 7 years, then 3 years, then just 9 months, and now 1.5 years. So what it tells you is that as India's markets grew, Sensex grew, and accordingly the GDP also grew. So this whole idea that GDP grows in some isolation and stock markets grow in some other isolation, that is not true. Those things don't live in separate universes. They are all part of the same universe. So that's a very important finding. The second thing it says, again very important, it tells you that when you privatize a PSU, the value of that PSU goes up. And it gives you examples of companies that were privatized under Arun Shourie as disinvestment minister when Vajpayee was in power after 2000 onwards. All of them, it shows, all the good companies have added much more value to themselves. And then the survey gives you a very interesting example. In fact, you have to go deeper in the survey to find it. It tells you, it makes a comparison between HPCL and BPCL. Now, Government of India effectively sold one and is selling the other. Just that HPCL was sold to another government company, that's ONGC. So the survey says that until September, stock prices of both HPCL and BPCL are following about the same trajectory. After September, once the government announces that they will privatize BPCL, its stock price starts going up and leaves the HPCL trajectory far behind. And since then, in just about 3 months, do you know how much value has the BPCL stock added to its market capitalization? It's added 33,000 crores. So just the talk that you're going to, or just the offer or the commitment that you're going to privatize a public sector company has led to an enhancement in value by 33,000 crores. It's a lot of money, but it makes the point that even the markets, the people, everybody believes that these are solid companies with good franchises. If they are privatized, if the hindering hand of the government is taken away, they will acquire much more value. So there's a big vote for massive privatization, and I do hope that that happens. This economic survey, in fact, is one of the strongest cases for privatization, free markets, minimum government, maximum governance, and trust than I have seen in any government document since 1991. In fact, some parts of it look too good to believe, because that's not the way you have the Indian bureaucratic system or bureaucratic political complex usually putting out communication on the political economy. So this is a big change, because if you read it in greater detail, you will also see that it's talking about not only that the government should be less involved in our lives, in businesses, it also talks about a more equal playing field for newcomers. What does it mean? That means that when newcomers come in and the existing players feel threatened, because they have connections with the government and the political class, they go there and they say, boss, thoda tariff padha do, import aa raha hai, kuch ho raha hai. And because of cronyism, governments that intervene, that the survey says is not good for Indian entrepreneurship. So that becomes crony capitalism, which means, if I translate it, it means no protectionism. So there are many areas in this survey where I see this running sort of contrary to the thinking of Swadeshi Jagran Manch, which exercises a great deal of influence on economic decision making in this government. So let us see whether this government is able to defy SJM or not on some of these things, because the next point after this that the survey talks about is trade. It says trade creates wealth and trade creates jobs. And it wants India to be more confident about being able to export more. It says assemble in India, again a catchphrase, assemble in India should now be integrated with make in India, because India has a large population and a big demographic dividend. Instead of capital intensive growth, India needs labor intensive growth. So start assembling for the whole world, particularly as China is becoming less and less competitive because of rising wages there. And in fact, the survey says that if you follow this formula of integrating assemble in India with Make in India, then you can create maybe 4 crore more jobs by 2025 and 8 crores by 2030. Now, those are projections. They happen when they happen. But I see this as a very good idea that India should stop worrying about imports. India should stop being underconfident about exports. India should move in that area. There is no need for us to raise our walls and keep on making them higher and higher around us. India should have the confidence to go out and engage with the world. To wrap up, the reason I like these economic surveys, one, because it bats for free markets. Second, because it bats for less government intervention in our lives. And third, it talks about trust, trusting the citizen. And I will quote a couple of lines from the survey. It says that wealth creation and economic development in several advanced economies has been guided by Adam Smith's philosophy of the invisible hand of the market. Then it says that despite the dalliance with socialism, 4 decades is but an ephemeral period in the history of millennia, because India is thousands of years old. India has embraced the market model that represents our traditional legacy. So, market model has not come in from outside. This is not an accident, as our tryst with socialism. Socialism is an accident. For several decades, make most Indians believe that Indian economic thought conflicts with an economic model relying on the invisible hand of the market economy. This is really using Indian culture, Indian history, Indian scriptures to bat for a free economy. So, talking about trust, I particularly like the line that the chief economic advisor has used in the survey, and he's also speaking in his many interviews. So, he calls trust as a public good, like any other public good, with one difference, that unlike other public goods, trust as it is, which become less when they are consumed, trust actually increases as it's consumed. So he says trust as a public good is unique in that it gets enhanced with greater use. So once again, free markets, trust the citizen, less government, wealth creation is good. No need to glorify poverty. Once you create wealth, the poor will also benefit. In fact, there is much in the survey that tells you that when wealth gets created, when the GDP grows, then everybody benefits, from employees to shareholders to the taxman and even the country's foreign exchange earnings. So this just has gain, 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 or plus, 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 plus written all over it. So once again, I like this survey, and the wish is that hopefully this year's budget and also the economic direction of this government will now reflect some of this, because what we saw last year was truly a disaster. So that course correction is needed. I do hope this survey is the first step towards that course correction.